Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the Mexican Museum and the Center for Latin American Studies at Berkeley. I'm happy to be at Berkeley again. Some years ago, I visited the Anthropological department. Professor Hastorf showed me her lab, and Rosemary Joyce did so. So I'm very happy to be here and to be with people who are interested in Mesoamerica. I have devoted 40 years of my life to study this metropolis. I will give you my insights on how this huge city functioned through 3 of the 5 projects I have done in the city. Could you please get the lights off? One of the, I will talk about 5 issues that for me make Teotihuacan an exception in Mesoamerica. One of it is the size of the city. This is the sprawl, the urban sprawl in the valley of Teotihuacan, and all of this is the basin of Mexico. So for pre-industrial times, we are talking about one of the largest pre-industrial cities in the world, comparable to Rome, to Constantinople, to Alexandria. So this is a phenomenon which is very strange, because before Teotihuacan, we don't have but small centers. And then, and as you see, this is the map by William Sanders, all the rest of the basin of Mexico is rural. We don't have a settlement pattern that shows secondary sites, tertiary sites, towns, and villages. We have the urban sprawls and the villages. So this is anomalous. This is not normal in early state societies. It's a 20 square kilometer city. It is also one of the things that provoked the massive coming of people to the valley of Teotihuacan, already occupied by formative villages, is the eruption of the Popocatepetl volcano during the 1st century AD. There is this huge volcanic eruption, and many sites around the slopes of the volcano, such as Tetimpa, Petlachica, Cruz del Milagro, occupied during the formative and excavated by Patricia Plunkett and Gabriela Uruñuela from the Universidad de las Américas in Puebla. These sites were abandoned. One of the things I have to tell you is that these sites were constructed with an architectural technique called tablero talud, which was used in Teotihuacan in a monumental scale. So these are the former manifestations of what we see in Teotihuacan. Another issue is that we see 3 structures around a courtyard with an altar, which was also replicated in a monumental scale in Teotihuacan. So what we see in this enormous city, first, a 20 square kilometer city, which is anomalous. Second, an urban grid, 2 in right angles, which is also very strange. Normally what you see around in classic Mesoamerica, even in Monte Alban, in the Mayan area, you never see an orthogonal trace, an orthogonal urban grid. This is what we called a corporate society, not behaving as the Maya, but where groups are more important than individuals. All Maya societies are a huge social pyramid where the dynast, the king, is the most important figure. All the scriptures, the representations are around this figure. And what we see in Teotihuacan is the inverse. We see groups, we see emblems of groups, we see office as more important than individuals. So this is one of the other characteristics that makes this settlement a unique phenomenon in classic Mesoamerica. The fourth thing is that it is multi-ethnic. So you see different ethnic groups residing, especially in the periphery of the city, where you see a Oaxaca barrio, we will see it, a merchants barrio, people from Veracruz, Michoacan enclave, people from Western Mexico, but we don't know what language was spoken by the large mass of Teotihuacanos. We still do not know because they didn't leave scripture as the Maya did. So what we see with the glyphs, the very simple glyphs that we find in the city, are emblems of groups that may be read from different linguistic approaches. So there is a problem. We don't know what was the main language in the city. Maybe Otomi, which was the most, the ancient linguistic background of central Mexico. Maybe afterwards the Nahuas came around 400 AD. Who knows? So we have here a capital of an early state. We have a sacred city. We have a site monopolizing obsidian, which was the main resource from which all technology was made, and a huge population from different ethnic grounds. And this is the map that René Milon drew in the 60s and published in 73. And you see the main part of what is called the core of the city, with the Pyramid of the Moon, the Street of the Dead, the Pyramid of the Sun, which are names that the Aztecs gave to this site and constructions when it was an abandoned site. When the Aztecs came 800 years after Teotihuacan, they gave the name Teotihuacan to the site. It's not the name of the site. Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon, we know that the goddess of flowing water was the sculpture in the Pyramid of the Moon. The storm god was the main god in the Pyramid of the Sun. So these are names that the Aztecs gave. So, and you see the street, the San Juan River being channeled to follow the urban grid of the city. And you see in the periphery the Oaxaca barrio, the Michoacan enclave, and the people from Veracruz. But throughout my research, I have seen that inside the city, in the neighborhoods of the city, we have also a multi-ethnic background that I will show you how, with science in the 21st century, we have found out who is who, from what part of Mexico did they come from, what was their function in the neighborhood, how they were provisioning the site with sumptuary goods, etc. So, of course, the site is so huge and so harmonic with the natural landscapes that you see that it was intentional to copy the slopes of the Patlachique range in the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Cerro Gordo behind the Pyramid of the Moon, a huge volcano to the north. So there is this dialogue between the natural and cultural environments at the site. We also see that there are three main pyramids, and as you will see, these are the main temples of three of the four that I propose, four co-ruler houses in the site. And Teotihuacan is divided into four by the Street of the Dead, which was an Aztec name, and the East-West Avenue. And in Mesoamerican cosmology, the cosmos was imagined as an underground space, a terrestrial space divided to the four quarters of the universe, and then the sky. So we have this underground space by the quarry tunnels that the Teotihuacanos excavated to extract the volcanic scoria from which they built the 20 square kilometer city. So we have these huge underground spaces. We also think, and that's Alfredo Lopez Austin's proposition, that the four-petal flower may have been the emblem glyph of the city. Who knows, perhaps. No? And you have these large plazas, the Ciudadela, the Plaza of the Moon, and the Plaza of the Sun. But for me, and I always will stress that it is my vision, excavating in different parts of the city, that these were the places where the elite met, not the common people. It was not a place where everybody could go freely at all. Common people were based in their neighborhoods. And at La Ventilla neighborhood, Rubén Cabrera has found control booths on top of the streets, not to the side of them, just to control the flow of people. So for common people, it was not easy to move around. They were based in their neighborhoods, but these are the spaces for the elite, which, according to René Milon, from the 125,000 people that dwelt in Teotihuacan, thousands of people belonged to the elite. And of course, ritual was one force that integrated this multi-ethnic population, because the main god of classic Mesoamerica was the same god everywhere, the storm god. It was called Tlaloc by the Nahuas, Chac by the Mayas, Cosijo by the people, Zapotec people from Oaxaca, etc. But it was the main god. So doing ritual for this main force, which was the state god of the city, involved planting rituals, involved this propaganda, which has nothing to do with particular individuals or rulers. It has to do with the forces of nature, with abundance of water, with fertility, with planting ceremonies. And this is typical of corporate societies. And because it was an inclusive society, people from Western Mexico could play the ball game with their sticks. People from Eastern Mexico could play them with their joints. And everybody was pulled to the city to work as craftsmen, as builders, bringing sumptuary goods, and they were allowed to do their rituals and their identity symbols as they did in their places. And of course, this is not from Teotihuacan, but from Ixcaquixtla, but you could see that people that brought thin orange wares and travertine onyx to the city wore turbans and dresses that were very different from those used by the Teotihuacanos. So I can imagine that when walking in the city, visual recognition was very important. Being a city where different languages were spoken, you could see that ethnic identity, office identity, hierarchy should be seen in how you dress, what type of headdresses you wear, what type of paint, even the Teotihuacanos, what type of sandals they used. So you could recognize people by seeing how they dressed. And of course, the multi-ethnic issue will be developed further on. So the foreign neighborhoods in the periphery, the Oaxaca people built in their neighborhood tombs as they did in Monte Alban, with chamber and antechamber, putting urns, as you see in Oaxaca. So they were doing their funerary rites as if they were living in Oaxaca. The people from Michoacan, they built tombs that were shaft tombs in the western part of the city with multiple burials, as you see in Western Mexico. The people from the Veracruz area, the Merchants Barrio that was excavated by Evelyn Rattray, was the only part in the city where they allowed the Veracruzans to build round structures, not according to the urban rules in the planning of the city, but huts that were made of adobe, as they did it in Veracruz. So these people were particular because they could build their neighborhood with huts. Unfortunately, in this barrio from Veracruz, you don't see many things brought from Veracruz. You see things from the Mayan area, you see thin orange ware from Puebla, and the neighborhood I will speak of, because I excavated it, had a lot of things from Veracruz, and you will see it further on. So identity, office, ethnicity, and also hierarchy should be seen in what you wear, how you wear it, the facial paint, the headdresses, and you could be recognized when walking in the city. One of my projects dealt with apartment compounds, the multi-family apartment compounds which are new in Mesoamerica, and this is one of the exceptional characteristics of Teotihuacan, because formerly you see families living in huts, households of mother, father, and children, but here you see apartments for each family, corporate groups residing in these different types of apartments. You see some very clustered and like barracks of workers. You see others that are very nicely set with huge plazas, ritual plazas, etc. And of course, these apartment compounds have beautiful mural paintings according to their hierarchy. And I excavated in the 80s an apartment compound that was like a very broad hill. And then you see many seasons of work, of extensive excavations until you have all the apartment compounds. And this was in the northwestern periphery, a very small apartment compound for only 3 households. But we could find out everything about the behavior of the 3 households because we dealt with activity areas. And of course, we did the chemical analysis of floors, we did the macrofossils, botanical macrofossils, the faunal analysis, and the objects. The chemical analysis of floors was one of the first experiments of doing so and finding out, of course, the people swept their floors, so they didn't leave many things. So we had to find out like forensic analysis of the floors with chemistry, with all these different studies until we have a kitchen, a storeroom, and where they were, of course, they were storing in huge amphoras, and how they were grinding and eating inside and what they had in their storerooms. So we have the 3 apartments of the 3 households, and National Geographic drew this excavation in the 1995, December 1995 volume of the journal. It was a very interesting anatomy of how the Teotihuacanos dwelt inside. Of course, even though these people were low-class Teotihuacanos, they were building their houses according to Teotihuacan standards, with lime plasters, with beautiful objects, as you will see, and Matt is organizing a Teotihuacan exhibition at the De Young Museum, maybe for next year, and you will see some of, you should remember I excavated them. You'll see this one. That's a beautiful theater type sensor. Even in a very low class apartment compound. This is unique. No, there is no replication of this one, but you will see that there are different, what in Spanish we call mantenimientos, food and important things like cucurbita or squash, tortillas, maize, squash flowers, tamales, etc. They are flowing down from this butterfly priest who is standing, and he had a butterfly, but with mica, which is here. But as you see, all these different objects that one can imagine are associated to people of more status are not. All the Teotihuacanos ate the same things, but in different proportions. So we don't have the access, the elite has access to special things. We don't see that in Teotihuacan. In general, what they ate, the access to mica, to slate, to greenstones, everybody had them, but in different proportions. And one thing that we saw in the apartment compound of Ostoyahualco 15B that we excavated is that one family is the most important of the compound. It has the state god as the patron god. There is a hierarchy. And we excavated before going to Teotihuacan, to Ostoyahualco, in the Mayan area, in Cobá, which is a huge Maya city. We excavated also a solar, a domestic area. And there we saw that each family, they were kin families, each had a dormitory, a kitchen, the other had a dormitory and a kitchen, but all shared a common sanctuary because the ancestors were the ancestors for all the extended family, but not in Teotihuacan. Each family, each household had the ritual courtyard, and each of them had their patron god. So these people may not be kin at all. They may be corporate groups, but they each had an apartment. And this hierarchy of a main family and two cadet families is similar to what we see in Mesopotamia in the Ubaid period, and of course in the Samarra period you see it, but in Ubaid you see the main family living in the central part of the compound and the two cadets to the sides. In Ostoyahualco 15B, the main family had the thunder god as the patron god, and for example, one of the lower class families had a rabbit as a patron god, or other animals, or the butterfly god. So one thing that we see in Teotihuacan is that there is a huge energy devoted to craft production. And we see crafts even at the domestic scale. We see the extraction of prismatic blades from obsidian. There is a lot of craft production in the periphery of the city. Most of the pottery, most of the lithic production is in the periphery going on. Even the stucco production to plaster all the city, because the city has two construction levels superimposed and all is plastered. You may imagine a 20 square kilometer city, the amount of energy needed to manufacture lime plaster from limestone. There is a lot of fuel involved, and Luis Barba, my first PhD student, calculated the amount of plaster when you put trucks filled with plaster from Mexico City to Tijuana. That's the amount of plaster in Teotihuacan. So it's a lot of energy involved. Yes, a lot of and there are crafts manufactured in the neighborhood centers, and I will talk a lot about these. And these are mainly the attires of the intermediate elites that managed the neighborhoods, and these are their different attires. And there are crafts of the ruling elite. I am excavating now a huge palatial complex of Shala near the Pyramid of the Sun, and you see the palace here. It's a huge enclosure here, and that's my excavation all these last years. And the ruling elite had the control of jade from the Mayan area and mica from Oaxaca. The rest of the sumptuary raw materials and items were brought by the intermediate elites of the neighborhoods. Here you see mica in Shala. We have now 37 kilos of mica brought from Oaxaca, only in the 15% of that palatial structure, and it's a huge movement of mica. Of course, the ruling elite also had garment makers, also had adornment makers, lapidary people, craftsmen embedded in the palace structure. So let's talk about multi-ethnicity, because that's one of the main issues related to Teotihuacan. And I will talk about multi-ethnicity because I excavated a multi-ethnic neighborhood center called Teopancasco near the Ciudadela. You see the Ciudadela here in Teopancasco is a multi-ethnic neighborhood center. What is a neighborhood center in Teotihuacan? Well, it looks very much like when you go to Mexico City, to the center of Tlalpan, for example, or the center of Coyoacán, where you see a church, you see the administrative buildings of the neighborhood, you see the clinic, the medical facilities, you see the police, you see some restaurants. Well, that's a neighborhood center. So there are different components that we excavated and analyzed, and when we were excavating this site, well, for 13 field seasons, different generations of young archaeologists were doing their practices there. And one of the differences between the apartment compounds where the Teotihuacanos lived and the neighborhood center is that the neighborhood centers have a huge plaza, a huge one, in the center of the neighborhood, a huge temple also, of an altar, and then the different functional sectors around. This site was first excavated by Leopoldo Batres in the 19th century because this marvelous mural painting was found in the house of a craftsman, a potter, in the 19th century. So they called the archaeologist at that time was Leopoldo Batres, and Adela Breton drew the mural painting, of which we nearly have nothing left, well, some hints. And you see two planting priests going towards the altar of the site. Here you have the altar of the site. Here you have the huge temple, the tailor shop or garment making area. You see also that the kitchens and storerooms to feed all the workers, the multi-ethnic components that work and work and work, and you will see how we have found out that they are working in squatting positions, that they are accompanying the caravans towards the Gulf Coast to bring all the things I will talk about. They are working and they are fed by rations of food to leave them working all the time. So we have also, of course, dated the different moments of the Teopancasco occupation, and they are, some of them are early, but most of them belong to the main two phases of Teotihuacan, Tlamimilolpa to Xolalpan, that is 200 AD to 550 AD. And domestic ritual, as I said, is very visible in Teotihuacan. There are plazas, there are temples, there are objects, sculptures that are used, but most of the things are depicted in the mural paintings. We have also found musical instruments. They are representations in the main plaza. And we have found out what are these planting ceremonies, what are these priests doing by the chemical analysis of the stucco floors. These are organic liquids being thrown with seeds. In this case, in Teopancasco, salvia seeds or chia seeds. These liquids are organic because they left phosphate traces in the stucco floors. These dark blue areas are the phosphates of the organic liquids. And when these priests are walking towards the altar, up the temple and down the temple, they are eroding with their sandals the stucco of the floor. And you see in this carbonate map, the erosion, the light yellow areas are the places where they have walked the most. So we can follow these issues with them. And in the main plaza, by also gas chromatography, we have found out that in the southwestern part of this plaza, they have decapitated individuals that we have found in the archaeological record, and also dismembered animals, because there is a cholesterol anomaly there. And here we have some of the 29 decapitated individuals in 350 AD as a termination ritual of the Tlamimilolpa phase. And this decapitation and dismemberment of people and animals are replicated also in figurines. They are doing the same ritual with figurines. Also, at that time, at 350, when the Tlamimilolpa phase ends in all the city, in Teopancasco, they have broken a lot of vessels, even these polychrome vessels that are now in the Museum of Anthropology. So we have rituals, very strange rituals that are not found in the rest of the city. Decapitation is found in Teotihuacan, but not at that scale, and not with each head in a vessel and cover. You don't see the covers because we have the photographs of the skulls, we've taken them out, but each head is placed in a vessel and topped with another vessel. This is a Veracruzan ritual, comparable to that of Cerro de las Mesas, Veracruz, where Drucker in 1943 found the skulls of children in vessels under the floor of Cerro de las Mesas, Veracruz. Also, the breaking of pots reminds us of the Fuego Nuevo that the Nahuas made. Well, all these different pots were broken, but we don't know if there were Nahuas in Teotihuacan, but at that time, the historic linguists tell us that the Nahuas may have come at that time to central Mexico. And then 200 years later, at 550, when we have the big fire in the city, we see in Teopancasco the desacralization of the main ritual sculptures of the fire god and the thunder god, with their faces towards the floors. They were effaced. The facial characteristics were effaced, and the pots were broken with the faces to the floors. Many different types of formal burials were found at Teopancasco, but also many different bones, some exposed to fire, others boiled, others with cut marks. So there was dismembering also at the site. And the administrative portion of the Teopancasco Neighborhood Center has to do with stamp seals, as we see it in Mesopotamia, but also with tokens for each worker to exchange for their tortilla rations. These tokens have a hierarchy. We have the ¿cómo se dice capataz en inglés? The foreman, which had the large portions, and then the workers, the medium scale portions, but also people who were eventual, or even women and children working, perhaps. Not many women, because the adult women buried at the site are only the 15% of the adults buried there. But we also have a hierarchy in different raw materials. We have tokens for workers, but tokens of mica for elite people at the site. We also have fractions of these tokens, so there may be eventual workers and full-time workers. And you see the tortilla depictions as these tokens also in the theater type center I mentioned that I found at Ostoyahualco. So there is no doubt that these are the rations that they receive as workers. The garment making area of the center, the craft production area, had a lot of needles, a lot of pins, of things that were used to make these elite garments. And there are a lot of animals coming from the Gulf Coast to Teopancasco, even crocodile, 14 varieties of fish from the coastal lagoons, for which you see some of them. And they were brought in the caravans sponsored by the intermediate elite of this particular neighborhood to the Nautla region of Veracruz. And this fish came open as a butterfly, like set like this, smoked and salted. These are the garments made at the garment making area. We have, it is the only dress in all Teotihuacan that has a relation to the ocean. You see the conch shells, the marine elements in the cotton cloths, which we found in the archaeological record. Also the facial portions of mammals set in the headdresses. All the different conch shells and pendants and buttons from conch shells being worked at the site to be set in the cotton cloths brought from Veracruz. We even have instruments for hides and for skins. We have also baskets and nets being worked at the site. So a lot of craftsmen are brought as experts, and they are set to work and work and work in very difficult positions. And we have the lacquering also of pottery to replicate the orange lacquer from Veracruz, and also imports from that area. We have a lot of things coming from different parts of Puebla, of Tlaxcala, that is the corridor towards Veracruz. Most of the metates, except those in the kitchens in the northern periphery, have to do with craft production. Those in the kitchens have to do with tortilla making, but these found at the site have to do with mural painting. The most interesting thing is, how do we know from which areas did each of the persons buried at the site came from? We have done all of this analysis: genetic analysis, ancient DNA, strontium and isotope analysis, and oxygen isotope analysis to know the altitude and the areas from which they came from. Of course, activity markers to know what were their activities in life, paleodietary analysis, element analysis. We have different funerary practices at the site, some of which are Teotihuacanos, some of which are foreign. This decapitation, large-scale decapitation, is foreign from Veracruz. So a lot of multi-ethnicities coming on at the site. We have a lot of newborn babies buried at the site. The women from the neighborhood came to give birth, but because of the conditions in which these babies were brought, well, they died and they were buried at the site. Most of the people of the adult population are males, very few females. And we know the provenience of the people buried there because we have done strontium isotope analysis, oxygen isotope analysis, and nitrogen to know the different trophic levels. We know which of the people have a very important marine diet component in their diet. We know, because of the oxygen analysis, which of the people came from the coast itself, which of them came from a bit upper, coming to the Altiplano, and even people coming from higher altitudes than Teotihuacan, that is Pico de Orizaba and Cofre de Perote in Veracruz. We also have compared their trophic levels with carnivores and herbivores found at Teopancasco itself, and we have most of the people being fed by tortilla rations, and animals also fed with maize, that is turkeys and dogs. They are fed at the site with tortillas and with maize, so most of them are a maize eating group, but we have exceptions being out of the group. So there are people who have access to fruits, to other animals and even to wild animals. And when comparing my population from Tepancasco with other populations that have been analyzed with this strategy of isotopic analysis, the Temple of the Feather Serpent, the Oaxaca Barrio, the Merchants Barrio, and the Pyramid of the Moon, we see the blue, the dark blue is Teopancasco, that we have people coming from many parts of the corridor towards the coast of the Gulf Coast. And we have in general three groups: the local people from Teotihuacan and the Basin of Mexico, the people from the corridor, that is Puebla, Tlaxcala, and Hidalgo, and the people from the Gulf Coast. And even we know from what altitudes they came from doing the oxygen analysis. With strontium isotope analysis, we know the geology from which they come from. And we see people coming from afar, even from some of the divers that we have, because they have auditory exostosis, that is a deformation in their ear for diving in cold waters and bringing the conch shells to Teopancasco. These people, one of them even comes from the Chiapas area. So we have the migrants from very far regions, the migrants from the corridor, and the local people. With one of my students, we did the activity markers, and we have the people doing the garment sewing, and they have deformations in their thumbs and their fingers. People that are working with fibers, with their teeth, have this type of problems in their incisors. People coming that were going with the caravans and bringing the fish, the cotton cloths, etc., had with the mecapal the pressure in their vertebrae, and we have individuated which of them were walking long distances and bringing the burdens with them. But one important thing is that these craftsmen, these people working in Teopancasco, had in their areas of origin, they had nutritional stress. So I can imagine that as most migrants to great cities, to large cities, they came to have better living conditions, but also to have a regular food provision working at neighborhoods such as Teopancasco. There are many paleopathologies in this population. There is an example of facial paralysis. There are many different other individuals have been processed, perhaps to do most of the instruments that we see in the bone instruments at the site come from human bones. Some of them are from turkey bones or from rabbit bones. We have some cases of cranial deformations that are not common in central Mexico as these ones, the tabular oblique examples. We have also mutilation of teeth that are not common in Teotihuacan, so these are foreign cultural practices. But what is most important is that the genetical analysis of this population stresses that from the beginning, the four haplogroups of Mesoamerica, the four genetic groups, A, B, C, and D, are present in this population. So you see that the functioning of most of these neighborhoods are multi-ethnic since the beginning. This is how Teotihuacan was formed, as a pact, as a multi-ethnic pact, as a corporate society. Here with DNA, we could even see which of the individuals could be the ancestors of what other groups. And with the ancient DNA, we could also sex the babies. The newborn babies were half females, half males, but the adult populations were mostly males and only 15% women, which were qualified craftsmen. That's why they were working in this site. And here we see the sexing of this population. And we also see that females are more diverse genetically than males. And this is an haplogroup analysis. We have also done a bit of facial approximation of some of these people, how they looked in life as forensic anthropologists work with. We have more or less different types of profiles and different types of approaches. Even one child that was going to be a military person because he was buried in the military sector, in the police sector of the site, and he was buried with figurines that had military attires to be, so he could learn how to dress and undress with them. And you see different profiles in this population, different different deformations. We have also done the chemical analysis of the kitchens, and we know where the administrator lived with his family. He had a part of the neighborhood center. Here is the military quarter, and the figurines with which that child was buried with, and that is a military person with all his attire. So, of course, baskets were also made, and nets were also made at the site, but mostly these attires that gave identity to this neighborhood as related to the ocean. That is not the case with other neighborhoods at Teotihuacan. And of course, we have evidence of shell work at the site. The largest varieties of shells from Teotihuacan are found at Teopancasco, and this is the corridor towards Nautla from which all the animals that we found at the site came from. Of course, cotton came also from Veracruz. We have cotton fibers at the site, but we also have vessels from Veracruz, from Orange Lake, from the Mixtequilla area. They also did imitations of these vessels with perhaps salvia oil, that is why chia is important. And as you see with Newton activation, we see that most of these vessels came from Veracruz, from the Mixtequilla area. This is how we find out the provenience of these vessels. We also have a set of things coming from Guerrero, that is slate and figurines of slate, granular ware, and perhaps pigments. And one of the very interesting things is the facial paint. How did the Teotihuacanos paint themselves? And this is a study we did with the Universidad de Valencia, with a huge amount. In the miniatures we find with the main burials at the site, we did a lot of different archimetric techniques, and galena is one of the main things we find out, and this is lead. So it is toxic. And as you remember, the Egyptians, they painted with galena their eyes. So what they did in Teopancasco is to mix galena with other hematite and mica and some other things to reduce the toxicity of this. We also have cinnabar, which is also mercury and is toxic. So they did some medical recipes to mix things and reduce toxicity. There was a doctor who graduated in France with a thesis analyzing the toxicity of these things. So they were like standard recipes to reduce toxicity. There is also jarosite, which gives the yellow color. There are also aromatic resins found at the site. And we have also found the pigments used in the mural painting at the site. With one of my students, Cristina Martinez, we analyzed the provenience even of the pigment roundels found at the site. So I think that we may find out a lot about the ethnic identity, not only analyzing funerary practices, but also attires. Maybe the different ethnic components of the site were preparing food in different ways with different ingredients. And what I imagine is that each neighborhood at Teotihuacan, and that's the most dynamic part of the Teotihuacan society, formed like a house society. Each neighborhood had their own feasts, their own relics, their own attires, their own titles, their migratory tales. They were a group with an identity. In Mesopotamia, Susan Pollock called those types of corporate, large, very complex corporate groups oikos. In Mesoamerica, they may have been house societies, and maybe the emblem of the Teopancasco house society was the fish. This is the only place in all Teotihuacan with 14 varieties of fish from the Gulf Coast, with a lot of things related to the ocean. And the bringing of cotton cloths maybe made these people enrich themselves and compete with other neighborhoods. So you have at the base of the society a corporate organization in the apartment compounds. At the top of this society, a corporate organization in the co-rulership, as you will see a bit further on, just slightly, I will pass it quickly. But in the middle of this society, in the most competitive part in the neighborhoods, you have the other type of behavior, the competitive entrepreneurial behavior that tore apart the corporate organization of Teotihuacan. So there may have been a middle class of very qualified craftsmen in the society, and the intermediate elite that managed the neighborhoods, and the ruling elite. So what you have in Teotihuacan is the opposite of the Maya. The Mayas were ruled by a class that had even that behaved as deities. What you see in Teotihuacan, maybe in the rulership in the summit of this society, for me, Linda Manzanilla, there were 4 co-rulers of the site, each one coming from a different district of the site. This is how I see Teotihuacan. There is a group of the felons in the northeastern part of the city, where you have the Pyramid of the Sun as the main temple. And as you see in the facade of the Pyramid of the Sun, there are a lot of felons. In Shala, where I excavate, there are a lot of felons. In the other part, in the northwestern, there are eagles and flying emblems, birds of prey, etc. And a lot of them were found inside the Pyramid of the Moon by Saburo Sugiyama in their consecration rituals. And in the southeastern part you have the serpent, and the Pyramid of the Feather Serpent is the main temple. And in the southwest you have the Coyote group, and they do not have a pyramid because probably these were foreign people originally. They didn't belong to the 3 groups that originally organized this society. And in the Las Colinas vessel that Linné found, you may see these 4 emblems being related to the possible 4 co-rulers. Nobody has ever found a royal tomb in Teotihuacan. So nobody. So what is the issue behind this? Maybe because a co-rulership does not privilege a person, as you see in the Mayan area, where the Acropolis is the place where the palace, the royal palace is set, where the funerary temple is set. So when you have co-rulership, you dissolve this importance in the individual, and we have other corporate societies which are exceptional in their areas. We may cite the Indus Valley civilization in Pakistan with Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, huge cities, orthogonal cities as Teotihuacan, with urban grids, but no rulers, no clear palaces. Maybe Tiwanaku, which I also participated in Bolivia, also may have had perhaps two rulers at the site. So many people have asked themselves, where are the ruling elite living in Teotihuacan? Well, the Palace of the Sun, in front of the Pyramid of the Sun, was one guess. The Quetzalpopatl Palace to one side of the Moon Plaza was another guess. These two palatial structures to the north and south of the Ciudadela were guesses also, but what the archaeologists found has nothing to do with the special people inside. These are normal things that you find throughout the city, throughout the Street of the Dead. Even the Street of the Dead complex was one proposed as a possible palatial structure of the city. Well, I am excavating one, a huge palace to the north of the Pyramid of the Sun, perhaps a decision-making area for the core rulers, perhaps. They are the elite that is controlling mica from Oaxaca. There are a lot of jade coming from the Mayan area. This huge palatial structure is not in the Street of the Dead, but has a private area, and the only place where the four structures, one to each quarter of the universe, is set, as if imagining the offices of each of the four core rulers. Each of these structures set to north, south, east, and west, with a temple in the center. These structures were looted when the city fell, when the city was burned in 550 AD. Most of each of the structures has a different deity represented. One has to do with the thunder god, the one to the east. Another has to do with a fire god. Another has to do with the god of the mountains. And so we see that perhaps these co-rulers were embodying also deities. Each of the structures has a different set of botanical macrofossils to give them their identity. And you see the looting areas also in the summit of these different precincts. And when the city fell with the huge fire that for me was a revolt of the intermediate elites of the neighborhoods towards the ruling elite, the sculptures were beaten into pieces. Not only as we saw in Teopancasco, with their faces a bit effaced and then thrown towards the floor, but really in pieces. So you see here structure one with a fire god, from which you see only some pieces of the sculpture, and the ceiling, the beams of the ceiling were burnt, and they fell towards there. No? We also see that this northern structure related to the fire god had a lot of pregnant women figurines. So maybe fertility, human fertility was related to that particular structure, as well as a group of botanical macrofossils. The one to the south had this sculpture, the tallest sculpture in Teotihuacan, anthropomorphic, broken into 80 pieces. So it's a revolt. It's not an invasion. We don't have an invasion. We have a revolt towards the ruling elite. And perhaps this was the structure of the mountain god. We have found the altar of the mountains, as you see in this mural painting found at the Denver Museum, Art Museum, perhaps coming from Teotihuacan. We found at the archaeological site the mountains, but in pottery. Perhaps this was an ancestor, a leader, but a lot of mountains, as you see in this representation, and a lot of botanical macrofossils associated to this mountain. The one to the west has to do with fertility symbols also, jade and conch shells from the Pacific and the Caribbean. We have also found substructures, that is, former structures that were embedded in the late structures that were burnt in 550. So perhaps these rulers were embodying different deities of the city. And what we also see is that there is a central temple. They were doing ritual together. They had all craftsmen working with them, with cinnabar, with mica, with lapidary. We're trying to find out from what part of Oaxaca this mica came from. A lot of garment-making people and decorative insignia being done at Xala, and also, of course, work shells. We have representations of different deities, different human sacrifices represented at the site, as well as offerings of marine shells, of jade, of green stones, and found. This is a very particular place because it has a wall that surrounds these huge palatial structures with people that can be protecting the site. We have huge jaguars decorating the structure of the thunder god, as we see to the western part of the pyramid of the sun. Of course, we have done archaeomagnetic dating of the fire that ended the life of the city, and all these events, the revolt that provoked the collapse of the city. So we have different extraction of objects at Xala, 2 of them in pre-Hispanic times, 2 of them in modern times. There were mural paintings looted around the 60s, 1960s at the site, but we have tried with very careful excavations to find out who looted what and try to imagine what is missing from the archaeological record. But where are the rulers of Teotihuacan buried? They may be buried under their living residences. They were maybe they were buried in administrative palaces such as Xala. We now have found out that they are not buried inside the Pyramid of the Sun. So the state temple is not an example. So this is a very particular society. As I said, it's a huge city, a multi-ethnic one, not only because of the foreign barriers in the periphery, but because of the multi-ethnic dynamics of the neighborhoods led by the intermediate elite. And it is a very strange type of state. It's what I called an octopus-like type of state, with the head in the huge city and the corridors of sites towards the sanctuary areas, provisioning sectors as the tentacles of this state. Who are the allies? Of course, Monte Alban in Oaxaca was an ally. You see Teotihuacanos giving gifts to the Lord, to the Zapotec Lord. These are not enemies, are allies. The only enemies were the Maya at that time. And in 378, a group of Teotihuacanos organized a coup d'etat in Tikal, Guatemala. It's not the Teotihuacan state that organized that coup d'etat. It was a group of the Feather Serpent people thrown out from the city. The Feather Serpent pyramid was burned. All the sculptures were torn from the temple, and another platform was built to efface the facade of the temple. So the people banned from Teotihuacan, perhaps, were the ones who armed, organized the coup d'etat in 378 at Tikal. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for such a rich, compelling presentation. We have time for some questions. We ask that you keep the questions or comments brief so we can have as full a discussion as possible.
Please.
In the DNA studies, some of the people appear to be like big-nosed people like you have in the Mayans. Do these show any European ancestry?
At all. These 4 haplogroups are the American haplogroups or Mesoamerican haplogroups. The European haplogroups are H and other letters, and not these 4 that are the main Indian population of Mesoamerica.
Yes.
Can you hazard a guess about what the role of women was?
At the neighborhood center?
Did everyone hear that in the back? No. Can you hazard a guess as to the role of women?
Yes. Well, it all depends where. In Teotihuacan, which is a multi-ethnic neighborhood, these women, the 15% of the adult sex in the site were women, are very qualified craftsmen. Yes. That's why they are considered comparable to the male craftsmen at the site. They were doing craft production, and they were multi-specialized. They were working with fibers, they were sewing, they were transporting things, and they were possibly some of them were throwing nets, and you have the movement in their limbs that they were throwing nets very often. So perhaps they were involved in the provision of the fish in the caravans.
Yes.
You mentioned decapitation as part of a termination ritual in
Yes.
Veracruz. I don't know what a termination ritual is.
Okay.
Can you explain that a little more?
Yes. I was talking about the termination ritual in Teotihuacan. But in Veracruz, in Cerro de las Mesas, you find a ritual that is comparable to the one I found in Teotihuacan. Termination rituals are very common in Mesoamerica. These involve some rituals that are made to end one constructive period, and another one will begin on top. So they do this to end one history and to start another. So site that this is 350, and that's the end of the Tlamimilolpa period in all Teotihuacan. But we have them as termination rituals in Teotihuacan. Elsewhere, what we have in other parts of the city is that you have a construction level. Even you can visit these structures with tunnels now. For example, the Jaguars Palace or the superimposed buildings. You can go to see the Tlamimilolpa structures that were engulfed in the later ones that you see on top, and you walk and see the city of the Xolalpan period, the later one, the one that goes from 350 to 550. So if you want to see the earlier one, you have to go through tunnels. And here what we have is that the termination rituals, the decapitation of 29 individuals, the breaking of pots, ended the 350 era, and you see on top the new era.
Yes. Yes.
Could you repeat what you said about the size of the city? You were comparing it to Rome and...
Well, comparable in general as a huge city, not comparable exactly in dimensions. It's a 20 square kilometer city. Some archaeologists state 22 square kilometer city. It's 125,000 people. And you may feel that is not very big as a population. Well, it's enormous for pre-industrial times. Enormous.
So larger than Rome?
No, because Rome, you should remember that Rome has a core, and then a lot of different areas that are connected by the, ¿cómo se dice? Calzada? By the... the boulevards. So you have the main core, and then some the areas that are not constructed, and then another area connected by a boulevard. So it's not an urban sprawl all the way around. So it's very difficult. Well, they have census, so you know more or less the population, but it's not the same issue here. Here you have a constructed area and then the rural area. You don't have secondary sites, tertiary sites, and then towns. You have villages and the urban population. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
You mentioned the name of the street had later, but just the avenue or the street as it had, was there any evidence that was involved, like ritual activity related to, rural gatherings?
No, in fact, what the Aztecs saw was that along the Street of the Dead, the Toltec population, which came after the Teotihuacanos, they put sitting burials because they venerated this city also. So what we see, and we have found them, these Mazapa burials, which are Toltec, post-Teotihuacan, they are all along the Street of the Dead. So that has nothing to do with the function that the Teotihuacanos gave. Mostly these were administrative and ritual and ruling elite areas. So nothing to do with burial areas.
Yes.
Have you found any evidence of trade with native tribes here in what's now the U.S.?
No, because the turquoise trade came after Teotihuacan.
Oh.
No, not one piece of turquoise we have in Teotihuacan. We have greenstones, slates, mica, jade, not one piece of Teotihuacan time. So the Toltecs, they expanded the network and they have the turquoise.
Okay.
Yes.
Toltec and Mixtec populations.
Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship with the Popocatepetl volcano? I didn't quite understand at the beginning of your lecture.
There was an eruption, a volcanic eruption of volcanic glass and lapilli in the 1st century AD. It's very early, and a massive movement of people that were living in the slopes and constructing with talud tablero, which was a form that then Teotihuacan afterwards replicated in a very monumental way. They were living there and had to move out of that area. And many of those persons came to the valley because we see their behavior being replicated afterwards in the city. Even the 3 constructions around a courtyard with an altar, that is the 3 temple plazas in Old Teotihuacan.
Unfortunately, I will recognize you in a moment. This will have to be our last question. I think we're just beginning a conversation. And that leads me to think that we have to have Linda Manzanilla back in Berkeley to continue this conversation. Am I right on that?
Only if I find the rulers of Teotihuacan.
And before recognizing you, I also want to thank once again the Mexican Museum and Cayetana Shkurovich Gomez, which inspired this event with the Center for Latin American Studies.
Thank you.
Well, this is just a tiny question. I just didn't understand what Teotihuacan was. Was that part of Teotihuacan?
Yes, it's to the south of the Ciudadela. That's the neighborhood center I excavated. But it's Teopancasco, because all of these pieces of land had now names since colonial times. So the name of that area is Teopancasco.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And thank you for all coming. We look forward to seeing you at future events.